Hi, I'm Johnny Knoxville, and this is my David Lynch ranking. Right off the bat, let's get this clip out of the way.
Such a sadness that you think you've seen a film on your fucking telephone. Get real.
David Lynch is a very strange and unique director. Lynch's films are very well known for their nightmarish imagery and the way they often break the rules of conventional filmmaking. His films are often dark, surreal, and touch on themes of violence and the sadistic side of sex. So, since I'm a big fan of his work, I thought it would be fun to rank every David Lynch movie. First of all, I'm not going to count Twin Peaks because that's a TV show. I'll talk about my thoughts on the show when I get to the movie Fire Walk with Me, and I'll touch on a bit of my thoughts right now. Second favorite TV show of all time behind Breaking Bad? Yup. To be fair, take that statement with a grain of salt because I haven't watched that many TV shows, nor do I really care to. To quote Joel Cohen, TV shows have a beginning, a middle, a middle, a middle, until the whole thing dies of exhaustion. Anyways, here's the list. Keep in mind, these are just my dumb opinions, you don't have to agree with them.
There seems to be a growing trend in Hollywood now where there's a lot of prominent product placement. How do you, as a filmmaker, feel about this growing trend?
Bullshit.
Yeah, Lynch's adaptation of Dune from 1984 is pretty bad. Sure, I commend David Lynch for taking such a huge risk, and it's definitely an interesting experiment as far as 80s fantasy movies go.
But too bad they were just fucking jerking off.
I know there are some people that prefer this version over Denis Villeneuve's adaptation. Y'all are weird. Yeah, I prefer the banana peel over the banana. This movie is very goofy and not in a charming way, but in an annoying way. The overall look of this film is kinda gross. I don't know if that's the fault of the visual effects or the cinematography, but I just don't like the way this film looks. Just like some other films I've talked about in these ranking videos, Lynch also hates this movie. To be fair, the original book is pretty damn difficult to adapt. An over 600-page book with appendices, almanacs, and maps used for exposition. So yeah, the fact that Villeneuve's adaptation turned out so good is pretty impressive. It was pretty fun to see Sting in the movie, but that's about it. Yeah, let's move on to the Lynch films that are actually good. Wild at Heart is wild. Laura Dern is amazing as the main character, Nicolas Cage is hilarious as Ripley, and Willem Dafoe is hysterical as the villain. The strongest part of this movie for me is the comedy. The comedy is hilarious and shows that David Lynch has a great sense of humor, and the music fits the tone really well. I do have one major issue with this movie, and it might sound strange at first, but just hear me out. This movie is too weird and too normal at the same time. The story is very simple, which is fine, and the editing is very surreal, which is also fine. However, instead of meshing with each other, they clash into each other, which just makes this movie kinda jarring sometimes. For example, despite this movie being a comedy, there are some moments that just get needlessly dark, and it does not work well with the rest of the movie's tone. Also, the Wizard of Oz references were kinda cool at first, but it got annoying pretty fast. Honestly, I think this movie would have been much better if the plot was just an adult version of Wizard of Oz set in Texas. Anyways, if you want to watch a movie where the very simple plot and the very surreal editing mesh well with each other, watch Hausu. Yes, that's how you're supposed to say it, I don't care what the poster says. But overall, this movie is still great. Not one of Lynch's best, but far from his worst. Inland Empire is interesting. Laura Dern's performance in this movie is harrowing. The nightmarish and surreal imagery in this movie is just unforgettable. The overall tone of this movie is very anxiety-inducing, and that ending is chilling to say the least. One thing that makes this movie and a few other David Lynch movies unique is that they don't spoon-feed the plots to you. Lynch leaves the plots up to audience interpretation and mainly focuses on theme and tone as a way to drive the narrative forward. Although this way of storytelling may be frustrating to some, I find it to be very interesting and creative. Inland Empire is also the final movie in Lynch's Los Angeles trilogy, a non-chronological trilogy that's deal with the often ignored horrors from the land of fame and fortune. This movie in the trilogy looks at domestic abuse and neglect, so needless to say this movie is also pretty disturbing. I do have some problems with this movie. Yeah, I know the cinematography is supposed to look unprofessional, but I still don't like it.
Holy crap!
Also, there's nothing wrong with 3-hour movies, but I was starting to feel the runtime near the end. But overall, this is a bizarre yet very great movie. The Straight Story is Lynch's most heartwarming film. The story is very simple, an old man going on a trip in his tractor to reconnect with his brother. However, it's through this simplistic story that Lynch finds beauty in stuff like the rich setting and the quirky characters that the old man meets along the way. A tedious experience at times, but a very rewarding one. Richard Farnsworth gives a fantastic performance as Alvin Straight, who is such a lovable character. Also, that ending was just perfect and really made some of the rather tedious moments worth it. The editing transitions can be really cheesy sometimes, but overall, this is a beautiful film that shines in its minimalism and heart. Also, seeing the Disney logo slapped on a David Lynch film is pretty funny. The Elephant Man is David Lynch's most normal movie. And it's a black and white biopic about a man with an extremely rare deformity. Anthony Hopkins is heartfelt as the main character, Freddie Jones and Michael Elphick are both diabolical as the villains, and John Hurt is incredible as John Merrick. The makeup in this movie is beyond impressive. In fact, the makeup is so impressive that it's influenced the Academy Awards to add the Best Makeup Award to the Oscars. This film is very dark and heartbreaking, the ending is a great cherry on top, and in true David Lynch fashion, the cinematography, the editing, the music, and the production design are all beautifully nightmarish. I guess the only thing that keeps this from being a top 5 for me is I wish it was a little weirder. However, if you've ever wanted to get into David Lynch's filmography, it's hard to deny that this is a great starting point. Overall, this movie is amazing and is the only David Lynch film I could recommend to anyone without a disclaimer.
What a heavy load Einstein must have had. Fucking morons everywhere.
Lost Highway is chilling, to say the least. It's such a surreal and nightmarish experience. This is the first movie in Lynch's Los Angeles trilogy, and it focuses on violence and crime. The cinematography and music are both beautifully haunting. I'm not going to go into what this film is truly about because I don't want to spoil the experience of you trying to put the pieces together yourself. To be honest, the overall vibe of this movie really reminded me of Meshes of the Afternoon. Yeah, I just made a reference to a short avant-garde film from the 40s, and yes, I've never had sex before. Just like most of Lynch's work, it's definitely not a movie that's going to work for everyone. Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel both gave this movie a thumbs down, which Lynch brilliantly poked fun at in one of the film's posters. And sure, there are things in this movie that I'm not the biggest fan of, like the clip where Marilyn Manson acts like a creep has aged about as well as a Looney Tunes propaganda cartoon from the 1940s. But overall, this is a movie that is just simply unforgettable. Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me is a lot. Just like I talked about in the introduction, I'm going to talk about my remaining thoughts on the TV show really quick. It's a very bizarre show, but a very memorable one. The characters are also quirky and memorable, except for James and Josie. Those characters were as bland as wheat bread. Agent Dale Cooper and Laura Palmer are especially just phenomenal. The first season did a fantastic job at setting up this comforting yet sinister tone. Episodes 1 through 10 of season 2 were when the surreal David Lynch stuff started to truly shine. Episodes 11 through 20 of season 2 were boring. Luckily, episodes 21 and 22 of season 2 got me back on board. Anyways, this movie is dark. The show had some dark moments, but it still had quite a bit of levity and had a pretty cozy aura to it overall. This movie is just a depressing nightmare, and that's what I love about it. The tragic things that happen in this movie are made so much more visceral considering that I've gotten to know these characters so well through the show. Overall, I highly recommend getting into Twin Peaks if you haven't already. There are some dull moments from time to time, but the unforgettable uniqueness more than makes up for it. Oh, and the movie is fantastic too. Blue Velvet is very disturbing. It's a bit different from some of Lynch's other movies because the neo-noir plot is pretty straightforward. However, that doesn't stop this movie from being incredibly uncomfortable and hard to watch at times. The disturbing and distressing way this movie looks at the twisted side of sex and desire is just brutal. Isabella Rossellini gives a tragic performance as Dorothy, and holy shit, Dennis Hopper as Frank Booth might be one of my favorite movie villains of all time. Frank is so evil and easy to hate, and I tense up every time he appears on screen. There's also another thing about his character that's brilliant to me from a writing standpoint, but I don't want to go into spoilers. If you've seen this movie, you probably know what I'm talking about. The cinematography is beautiful and colorful, the soundtrack is haunting, and the sound design is immersive. Overall, this movie is just incredible.
I enjoyed it very much. My kind of movie. I liked it. I've seen it 5 times.
It's the weirdest thing I've ever seen.
Eraserhead is awesome. This was David Lynch's debut film, and what an incredible start to a career. The acting and characters are so bizarre, but that's what makes them so memorable. The black and white cinematography and editing are so unsettling and eerie. The production design is so uniquely dystopian. The sound design is so immersive and is honestly some of the best sound design I've ever heard in a film. And of course, the visual effects and makeup effects are so disturbing and grotesque. This entire movie just feels like it's from another dimension, or you're watching some messed up nightmare. And despite being super dark, this movie is also pretty funny at parts. This is just simply one of the most unique movies I've ever seen. A movie that deals with all the fears and insecurities of becoming a father in a way that I've never seen before. Overall, this movie is an experimental masterpiece.
Very entertaining. Very lively film. Gosh, it was the best thing I've seen all year.
Some inane, bizarre person with a disturbed mind wrote that film, and I did not enjoy it.
Mulholland Drive is my favorite David Lynch movie. This is the second film in Lynch's Los Angeles trilogy, and it looks at the dark side of Hollywood. Naomi Watts gives a strange performance as the main character, but I mean that in a good way. The lesbian relationship between Diane and Camila is charming, yet it has an unsettling aura that things may not be what they seem. This movie has one of my favorite movie jump scares of all time. The editing is dreamlike, the music is eerie, and the production design is colorful. This movie as a whole is just so dark, surreal, and nightmarish. However, there is some pretty funny levity sprinkled in, which further proves that David Lynch has a great sense of humor. Overall, this movie is a masterpiece. Even though I think I've got the main plot figured out, there are still some aspects of this movie I don't understand, but I feel like I don't need to. This movie is an experience like no other, and it's one of the most unique movies that I've ever seen. I would highly recommend watching this if you haven't already. So yeah, that was my David Lynch ranking. Once again, he's not a director that's going to work for everyone, but I think even the people who dislike his movies at least have an appreciation for his work. And I think I'm gonna end things there. Subscribe or something like that. Bye bye.
Today, I'm making a list of all the good things that are happening in the world. I'm still thinking.